So I'd really like to extend a warm welcome and a thank you to our adjudicating team. We've got Adrian Wormley, we've got Dave Garrity, we've got our chief adjudicator and our chairperson for today, Ronan Harris. So I don't know if you want to stand up and give a wave to the crowd. No. So for those of you that haven't been to a debate before, we're going to hear from both sides, and we encourage as much noise as possible. We encourage hears and boos and hisses and a lot of stamping of feet, which apparently is rampant in college debating. So feel free to get us involved and to get really passionate about the topics. So what I'd like to now is introduce you to our chief adjudicator and our chairperson, Ronan Harris, to speak a bit more about the debate and the motion.
Hi. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here at the first debate that we're hosting, and also it's sponsored by Women at Google. And interesting for me, it's about a book written by my former boss. So Cheryl was somebody who always inspired me. She was an amazing leader while I worked for her, and she had that impact on everybody around her. And the topic of this debate is also important for me because I have a son and a daughter, and listening to some of the things that Cheryl says in her book about, when my son is being rambunctious and telling everybody what to do, that he's being a leader. When my daughter does it, is she declared a leader or is she declared bossy, is something that I'm very conscious of. I'm delighted to see the awareness of this topic and the debate that's taking place within Google. Because it's by being aware that we get to do the right thing and make conscious decisions about this stuff rather than the unconscious ones, which can sometimes influence us. So the motion today, just to be clear, is that this House believes that Sheryl Sandberg's call to lean in will ultimately address the gender balance in the workplace. So what Cheryl says in her book is that we have, and just to quote the numbers correctly, 13% of women in our parliaments and just 15 to 16% in boards of corporate companies in corporate America. And these trends are true the world over, if not worse, in terms of the balance. Probably more troubling, I think, is the fact that these numbers haven't changed since 2002. And one of the lessons that Cheryl states she learnt from Eric was that when a trend plateaus, it rarely rises a second time without some serious catalyst. So we have two teams today. The first, on the proposition side, we have Merve and Ozgen. So a big round of applause. And on the opposition side, we have Natasha and Justin. Now, it's important to emphasise that this is a debate. Whether you sit for or against the motion on this stage today is not necessarily a reflection of your own personal views, but these folks will do their best to bring forward the most important points on this topic and of this debate. I also want to clarify that you are allowed to clap and cheer and stamp your feet, but heckling and chanting, probably not encouraged at this point. We do encourage you to take the opportunity to express your own views on this, but we would ask that you refrain from Q&A until the end of the debate, until all of the speakers have gone. We will then host a Q&A session, and you'll all have an opportunity to engage and take the debate a little bit further. So that being said, now time to give the floor to the Prime Minister of the House, which is Ozgen. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everyone to this debate on Sheryl Sandberg's famous book, Lean In. To be precise, the motion here today is that this House believes that Sheryl Sandberg's call to lean in will ultimately address the gender balance in the workplace. Now, as the Prime Minister of this House, what I'm going to do today is, first of all, I'm going to describe the problem that we have in the status quo and why we think, as a government, we need to intervene and do something about it. And then I'm going to explain what kind of proposal that we're bringing and what kind of solution that we're bringing to the table to solve this problem. And second of all, I'll be going through my main points, which will be two of them. First of all, why we need this kind of top-down approach to solve this problem, why the other approaches are not working at all, that we've seen in the history. And second of all, I'll be explaining why in current status quo we have an unfair competition between the men and women. So that's why we need to balance things out. So the first thing first, let me start with the problem definition. So thanks Ronan for the statistics that he gave us. I'm going to do exactly the same, because these things are so important to reflect the problem that we have right now. In the European Union, when we look at the top 300 companies, the female ratio we have on the boards is just 9.7%. On the other hand, when we look at the Fortune 500 companies in the US, the CEO ratio, female CEO ratio is just 4%, and when we look at the boards, it's just 15%. Let's look on the other side. That means that we have a male percentage of 85%, which is like 6 times higher than the female ratio. So what is that supposed to mean? Like, does it mean that men are 6 times more capable than women? Like, are they more clever? Are they better leaders? Well, we don't think so. We believe they have equal capabilities. And well on track. It's really going on really good. And that brings me to my main points. Like, first of all, why we need this kind of top-down approach to solve this big problem we have in our companies. First of all, we believe that there is a historical bias against the leadership of women. Cheryl explained this really good in her book with an example. So there is this business case that is distributed to the students of a college in US. So the business case is about the CEO, and the case explains their acts, their actions, their decisions for the company. There are two versions of this business case. In one of them, the CEO is female, and one of them is male. The other is exactly the same. And when they have a survey afterwards, what they say about the leaders is that they're equally competent, which should be the case because the actions are the same. But when they want to describe how kind of leaders these people were, when they're talking about the male CEO, what they say is that he's a likable person, he's a very good leader, and he's someone that you want to work for. But on the other hand, the female CEO got responses like, she's selfish, she's not likable, and you don't want to work for her. So that clearly shows that there's a historical bias. We don't care where that comes from, but we know that it exists and it needs to be addressed. So that's what we're doing with this proposal. Secondly, there might come some arguments on that. Why aren't we doing some trainings, some educations, like to make people more aware? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we've been doing so far for the years. But what we've seen is that the numbers did not change at all. Of course, if it happens naturally, then that's a better case. Like, if humans just managed to go on the top by themselves, that was really good. But it didn't happen. So that's why we believe, like, the awareness is there. People believe that women and men should be equal in the workplace, but it's not just practical. It's not happening. So that's why we believe we're done with the training and education. Now it's time to see some solid action. So on the sustainability of the solution, we believe this is going to be 100% efficient for all of our companies. Of course, we can't know what's going to happen. We have to wait and see. But what we have right now, as the government of Ireland, is that we have the faith in our women. And we know that once they're given the chance, they will prove that they have the ability and the same capability of men of leading companies, maybe even more. And that brings me to my second point to explain why we believe the competition right now is unfair. So think of a case of a manager, like he has a male candidate and a female candidate to promote. And they're equally good at their work. What's going to happen is not so hard to think about. So when he's going to think about the female candidate, all right, I'm gonna promote this person. Then what happens when she decides to have a child? She'll be out for 8 months. What happens if she decides for another one, which is another 8 months? So that brings us to the point that it's easy to say, that manager is going to say, if they're equally competent and equally good, of course he's going to go for the male candidate, because there's no such risk for the male candidate. And that clearly shows that woman is being punished. She decides to have a child, which is very, like 100% her choice, should be her choice, and she should not be punished for that. Moreover, we believe that, alright, we need to have an equal society. You're out of time, sir. we need to have an equal society, like the housework should be divided the same as well. But on the other hand, we know that, unfortunately, that is not practical. Unfortunately, our women are spending some more time in their housework. So whenever they go from their job to their house, so that's another job for them, which prevents them from resting, from maybe doing something for their work, from improving themselves. So on the other hand, the male can do that because they're not spending so much time on their housework. So these two real-life examples exactly shows us that right now we have an unfair competition and that needs to be addressed. So what we're doing right now is not positive discrimination. What we're doing right now is balancing things out so that we have a fair competition and we will then see who is better than the other one. Or maybe they're equal. So what I've told you today is that, first of all, I have addressed the problem that we have in the status quo. Then proposed a motion to solve this problem. And lastly, I've explained you 2 points. First of all, why we need this kind of top-down approach, and secondly, why the competition right now is unfair. So, we're proud to stand on the proposition. Thank you.
That's great, Oscar. Thank you. And if I could call the next speaker to the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished chairman, worthy opponents, I'm here today to oppose this ridiculous proposal. And before I continue with the main body of my speech and explaining what I'm going to talk about, I'd like to highlight the fact that fundamentally, the proposition and the opposition agree on the main issues here. We agree that it's a problem that women are underrepresented in the workplace. However, we disagree on how to address the issue. So I'll start off with my rebuttal before moving on to the idea of why this is not an equal solution, why businesses already have an incentive to follow these solutions, and finally I'll talk about why we need more family-friendly policies, and all of this will be elaborated upon by my partner. So to start with my rebuttal, their proposal is their kind of top-down, duct tape sort of approach to fixing what is a systemic issue which affects women from very earliest stages of childhood, is that, first of all, it's naive and impatient. By kind of punting women into the top position of management, we don't give them the opportunity to really earn it. If you look throughout all the famous women who have achieved things throughout history, there are people who have overcome things. The same is true of the men, but they haven't had as many things to overcome, arguably. But essentially, the women who win our respect are the ones who really earn their way to the top. This patronizing way of putting women in there will mean that even if it's not true, it will mean that there's a perception among some sectors of society that women have not earned their place among the highest echelons of the workplace. And this is precisely the problem we're trying to combat. Examples of this happening, for example, if you look at South Africa, they have similar laws for black people, and they have not worked because people haven't been as qualified because of systemic educational issues that have led them up to that stage. So, moving on to the main body of my speech, I like the fact that you brought up the point of history, actually, because I think it does stand on our side. The equality, first of all, it's good that we're having this conversation about women, but women are chosen partially because it's a very easy group to see. The systemic discrimination exists across all parts of society at the moment. For example, to mirror the study you mentioned, there was a study done in the States where it was found that black children with good grades have less friends. When the same study was done on white children, there was no difference. So we need to address this across the entire spectrum of society, rather than trying to go through the entire groups piecemeal. In addition, the inequality against women is two-pronged. We have the clear discrimination that you see, but in addition we have indoctrination from early ages, wherein women come to believe that they are not fit for leadership. And this is just as much of a problem as women being told by outside sources that they're not fit for leadership. So we need to address this from the very beginning and ensure that we create a generation of women that are not only capable, but also willing to lead and willing to jump in. Just forcing women who haven't, for example, less women currently want to go into the top leadership position, so trying to force them in isn't fair. What we need, nothing. What we need is the number of people in the upper management to reflect the number of people, the number of women in upper management should reflect the number of women trying to reach upper management. So if more men currently want to reach upper management, it only makes sense there be more men there. This is what we seek to fix. The second point I want to make is that diversity already makes business sense. There have been numerous studies done showing that having more women more gays, more introverts, more extroverts, whatever group you want to cut. Having more of them increases the productivity of the workplace. Having more opinions on the table makes it easy to find the optimal solution. Having an isolated, similar group of people thinking together, you might as well just have one of those people rather than all of the different people there. And it is this fact that from a market perspective, equality makes sense. Yes, it's slow. Yes, it's frustrating to watch that people are not reaching the highest points of management. However, this is how things have to work. If we try and just put someone into the top, they won't be as respected for it. Middle management will be deprived of qualified women. And one of the things that really bonds businesses together is the feeling of having been through the trenches together. If people are preferentially put up to the top, because they're seen as being from a minority group, I'll take you in a second, then they won't be seen as having fought as hard to get to the top. Yes.
So the fact is, like, when we put this quota, all the women in the company will not be in the board all of a sudden. They still need to strive for it, and they still need to fight for it, which is gonna be the same as your point.
Yes, of course, these aren't going to be random women off the streets. But the fact is that they're going to have to come from somewhere. Suddenly there's going to have to be a large influx of women from somewhere. And a lot of them may not have been ready at that point to go into that particular area of management. This is something that needs to be earned and wanted by the women. And the second point is something that I believe is being missed in this debate. The final thing we'd like to talk about, and it's something that my partner will expand upon, is the idea that there are other solutions. We personally think that family-friendly solutions are a prime example. Taking the option of childcare, and I think it's important to point out that men are perfectly capable of staying home and doing housework too, so we can easily add that. But more importantly, and the point of maternity leave, if you take a country like Sweden, maternity leave can be split between the mother and the father. There's this large block of time, and they can split it however they want. The father can stay home, the mother can stay home, and this is an equitable solution that makes sense. Either one can be a home carer, they can split it, and this really gives the choice. And this is a fundamental issue in women's rights that is often overlooked. Women are told what they have to want. They're told, you should be achieving this, this man has this, therefore you should have this. The fundamental issue in women's rights should be choice. If women want to be CEOs, we need to empower them to get them there. Some women won't, some women will, some men won't, some men will. And this is what we should encourage. The final point, it's kind of a point of rebuttal, I just want to throw it in at the end, is the idea of kids again. Women being able to have kids if we have this 40% thing. Well, imagine another scenario where you have two women, one of which has expressed the desire to have kids, and the other of which hates kids. As a management decision, it clearly makes sense to hire the woman who hates the kids, right? So I really think this is missing the issue, because there are women who don't want kids. So this entire argument rests on faulty assumptions about the nature of society. And it is for these reasons that I'm begging to oppose this motion and side with the opposition. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start my speech with an inspiring quote from Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. A truly equal world would be one where women ran half of our companies and men half of our homes. Today, we're here to tell you why we share this dream. Within the next few minutes, I'll talk about two main points. One, gender equality in boardrooms to parallel the makeup of society. Two, setting a good example for future generations to help dissolve unconscious and unfair bias against women. But before we get to that, I'd like to say a few things in response to what my colleague in the opposition just talked about. First of all, he said that our proposal was patronizing, and I'll tell you why it's not. It's not an issue of women being on boards because they're women. It's not an issue of women being on boards because they're given the position. It's about them being on boards because they're equally competent individuals. My colleague in the opposition implied that women are not ready, and we completely disagree with that, and we're sorry that women in the audience especially had to hear that. Thank you. Secondly, my colleague also implied that this top-down approach is not organic. top positions. Just a point of clarification, we want to give them the option. More women want to climb the corporate ladder these days, and they express this desire, in fact, but they're stopped by the glass ceiling. If the opposition is offering programs for families, educational programs for women, for men, for little boys, little kids, that's great. We are all for that. We completely support that. However, we have done educational programs in the past, especially in Western societies. I don't want to get into the details of what we have done, but you, I suppose, are all familiar with all the educational programs, all the perks that Google gives women for maternity and paternity, as well as the Republic of Ireland. However, the 15%, I'll take you in a second, however, this 15% number in the directorial level that we mentioned is no coincidence. This approach has not worked. It has not eliminated the glass ceiling. Unfair representation of women in the workplace still continues, and that's why our government needs to intervene. Please.
Yeah, thanks. Just as a point of clarification, you were arguing that we have these fantastic maternity benefits and everything, and you're saying in spite of all these kind of equal maternity and paternity benefits, we still have these issues. And you're saying that actually there's no policy prescriptions you'd offer to help bring women back to the workplace. Is that what you just argued?
No, actually on the contrary, I'm saying that we have these programs and we have these policies in place, some of them made by the corporates themselves, others by the governments, that have over the years in Ireland and many Western societies in fact have helped women and they have helped men. But with that, we actually reached the 15%, which is great, but it's not enough. We want equal representation in the board and in other levels of the company. Now to my points. We're proposing, point number one, we're proposing gender equality in the boardroom to parallel society as a whole. According to a McKinsey study, higher involvement of women in upper management is associated with increases in market capitalization, in operating margins, employee motivation, and customer satisfaction. All great things that we all want. A 40% quota will lead to increased employee motivation because the board will represent men and women in the company as a whole. Sandberg opens her book by telling a story about a day when she was pregnant and she was suffering from nausea. One day she had to park her car really far away from the office and she had to actually run to the office to make her sales pitch meeting. And when she got there, she was overcome by nausea. And she realized how many other women in the past must have experienced the same thing, but had to keep quiet. She was frustrated. She went to Sergey Brin's office, she was working at Google at the time, and said that they needed, expecting mothers needed reserved parking. Sergey readily accepted this proposal and said no problem, it went through without any problems or without any further discussions. However, what was astonishing here was that no one had thought about this before. You needed a woman in the board to be able to experience what other women experience and execute on it. Furthermore, a 40% quota will lead to increased customer satisfaction. On average, half of our company's customers are women. 58% of Facebook's users, in fact, are women. And ironically, Cheryl is the only woman on the board. To earn the love of our customers, which is the ultimate goal, we first need to be able to understand them, to identify with them, to empathize with them. That's why we need equal representation on the board, which will filter down to all levels of the organization. Point number two, setting a good example for future generations to help dissolve unconscious and unfair bias against women. We need to change the picture of women as caretakers and homemakers, and men as decision makers and breadwinners. We develop these perceptions from a very early age. When a girl tries to lead, for example, she's labeled as bossy, which is not very much of a compliment, because I've been there, I know that it's not a compliment. When a boy tries to lead, however, he's not labeled as bossy at all. This is not a term that we use for a boy, because a boy assuming the role of a boss or a leader is in fact what kids see in the adult world. It's not surprising, it's not offensive. A 2011 study where employees of leading companies were interviewed, this study concluded that 36% of men want to reach C-level positions, while this number is only 18% for women. That's half as many. While this gap is more pronounced in higher levels, it is evident even in college. More men than women choose reaching a managerial level as their 3-year after graduation goal and as a priority. We believe to tackle this problem, we need to set an example for younger generations. If girls see more women in C-level positions, they'll be able to put themselves in their shoes. They'll be able to picture themselves as a C-level representative. A 40% quota will raise the aspirations of young women. Warren Buffett said that one of the reasons for his great success is that he was only competing with half of the population, referring obviously to the male half. It is our duty to bring the other half in the game. Our society has made mistakes in the past. Women have been discouraged, belittled, looked down on. And now is the time to change that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. I could call Natasha to the stage.
Thank you, Ronan, and thank you everyone here for hosting the event and putting this all together. It's been really, really exciting. And thank you for the proposition for putting together this really interesting solution to what is a systemic issue affecting large parts of society. So thank you guys. A brief recap of the main points that we've heard the proposition make. One of them is that we need a top-down approach because clearly nothing else has been working. There's no other solution. We have to enforce quotas in the boardroom because nothing else has worked. Secondly, they tried to prove through examples that we would often agree with, for example, ingrained stereotypes, assumptions made about women. But instead of discussing how we can help strengthen and combat those issues, we've just they've decided that we're just going to put a Band-Aid over it and say quotas overall, not dealing with ingrained stereotypes, not saying not dealing with a lot of the implicit issues that women have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And lastly, they've discussed that competition is already unfair, and so we need to just balance things out by just kind of having simple quotas. Basically their main focus is that quotas are the absolute only way to enforce gender equality, and that's something that we believe could not be further from the truth. As my colleague Justin pointed out, the points on quotas are really little more than a Band-Aid to what is an underlying systemic equality issue. As something that I've really taken from LCS is that if we don't have pipeline and early on in the quarter, we're not going to be able to make those YouTube goals. And something I kind of want to bring to this issue, which is if we don't have a steady supply of capable women in the pipeline, we're not going to be able to bring them up to leadership positions. So what we see in Norway is we have the quota system that's been in place for 10 years. We have women who, because there's so few women already in C-level positions, they're operating, they're sitting on like 15, 20 boards, and then beyond them, there's no women to take their place. So it's a pipeline issue. So it just shows you that quotas can kind of address one part of the problem, but leave behind like the underlying supply side issue of how can we develop and mentor and foster high quality C-level women to take the existing women's place. Who will take Cheryl's place, and we want to make sure that there's a healthy supply of that. Secondly, we believe that it's dangerous to install quotas in as a system because they'll prevent meaningful improvements. Because we can just say, well, Google's installed a quota, we have 15 women in leadership positions, so obviously the issue's been dealt with. That's extremely unhealthy because this is a long-serving issue that needs to be dealt with. It's a complicated issue, we need to have several different ways to help combat that. And then thirdly, we believe that quotas are merely compensation for structural barriers that women meet every day in the career ladder. So let's focus on removing those structural barriers. Some with the proposition already brought up. Family benefits, low wages, tax structures that focus on women to stay home and punish them for re-entering the workforce, and ingrained stereotypes that prevent us from taking over, so to speak. Some of the solutions that Justin brought about, which I think that we need to reiterate, are that we need to develop a strong pipeline of women for the healthy ecosystem. The chairmen really have to look out to bring more women into the ladder. Yes, Oscar.
So the fact is, I see a room full of women that are so ready to be in the board. So do you really think that we have a pipeline problem?
Absolutely we have a pipeline problem, because if any one of the women who are sitting here in the audience today want to take off 6 months to go on maternity leave, in that time when they're off, everyone around them will be continuing to develop in their career ladder. And the men in Ireland right now, which has a very good social system in place, can take off 2 weeks of paternity leave. At the same time, the women have to take off 6 months. Now, that's not disparaging men at all, but that is disparaging a system in which we can do better. Men should not have to leave away their duties and say that they can only spend 2 weeks at home with the kids. We should take more of a progressive stance so that family benefits really mean family benefits and not just ways for women to take off the workplace and make it harder to get back into the system. So that deals with family-friendly policies we have to look to speed. And then thirdly is that we need to bring in a diverse array of opinions to the table. If we are going to institute quotas, let's not make it about women at all. Let's bring on some introverts to the table. So less people like us and more introverts. Let's bring together people who are not just about who are not divided along gender lines. Transgendered, we can bring in non-gender specific people, people who are not usually represented in areas of leadership. If we really want to institute a quota system, which of course won't take place because that's not addressing the underlying systemic issues. So 2 other points I want to add on to Justin's underlying issues on why this quota system will not work is that we need to, as I brought up before, we need to address the supply pipeline. Just the equal opportunity will not exist just because we remove the formal barriers. Just because we open up a boardroom to more women doesn't mean that the women 5 or 6 levels below will not have such an easy channel to flow upwards. We need policies that challenge traditional gender roles, so that even if there are 5 women at the table, if 3 of them have to go pick up their kids from daycare because the meeting's at 5 p.m., which is when childcare ends, that's not addressing the underlying systemic issues. And secondly, a more mundane point, but equally as important, we need to have better tax breaks for women. Speaking as an American, and I'm not sure if it's the same way here, but you're actually punished in terms of a tax structure if a woman takes off work to raise kids for a brief amount of time. They actually have a tax incentive for the woman to stay at home and take care of the kids. Similarly, they may actually, and a lot of us don't have to face these issues, but for a lot of women who are low-wage earners, which are the majority of women in the States are not earning the same kinds of wages, they may find it more expedient to stay at home and raise the kids because there's absolutely 0 progressive stances in place to help subsidize childcare or help share some of the burdens. So none of this will help women. Only help underline elitist kind of existing channels if we just kind of put a top-down approach and not help women who are facing tax structures and tax barriers to re-entering the workforce. And so, basically, kind of in summary, we believe with a lot of the points that the proposition brought up in terms of underlying stereotypes and implicit assumptions that women face. We just disagree that quotas are the absolute be-all and end-all. We don't believe that all of their issues have been exhausted, and ultimately, I think we can all agree that more women in the workplace and in C-level positions of influence will bring on better decision makers because we're leaving 50% of the people out of the workplace, and we just believe that it's a clean, cold economic argument. It makes more business sense to bring more diversity to the table. So thank you so much.
So thank you very much to everyone in the opposition and the proposition. And now we're going to invite the adjudicators to have a bit of discussion about who the winner is going to be. And while we're going to do that, we're going to have a Q&A and for everyone to raise their points of information. You're probably all wondering what the big prize is, by the way, and this is it. It is the Google Inaugural Debate 2013 Women Google Debate Champions Trophy. So that's what's at stake today. So now I'd like to pass it out to the audience. We've got a couple of roving mics up at the back. So does anyone have any questions for either the proposition or the opposition, or just some points they want to raise based on the debate? Any hands go up? Oh, we have one down here. Down here in the front.
Thank you. It has really been a very exciting debate, and I actually have a question to the opposition, because you've pretty much criticized the top-down approach, but what are the specific, very good alternatives that you could offer from a bottom-up approach?
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. We really focus on kind of our point was to really make sure that their decree, I guess, didn't pass, and that's why we kind of focused overwhelmingly on why quotas wouldn't work. But I don't think I may have gotten into too much detail, but family-friendly policies so that women, when they take off work for family decisions, that they can share some of that liability with a man, so that when a company looks at a woman and a guy of equal merit, and they think to themselves, and they're making a business case, well, we don't want to invest in this woman for a leadership position because she's going to take off her kids. So that's a bad business decision. We want to make sure that, well, the guy will also have to take off some time, or they'll have to share it, or that'll be, they'll have more options in place. There'll be maybe childcare, so the woman will have to leave for so long, and therefore that issue of women leaving and getting off the career ladder will be mitigated. So that's like one of the various ways that we could help address it.
Yeah, I could briefly add, in terms of the pipelining that we were talking about, of getting women opportunities from the very beginning, because obviously by the time they're having kids, you could argue it's a bit too late. Things like changing education, for example, I have a good friend at the university who, when she decided to take mathematics and physics before, in order to get into the engineering degree we did, was told unanimously by her teachers that, why the hell are you doing that? You should be in home economics. And this was in the west of Ireland, which is, well, not the west, but Ireland is supposed to be relatively progressive, and this kind of attitude really highlights that problems exist everywhere, even though we'd like to think we've largely addressed it. And another point possibly is that people say they're not sexist, people say they want women to succeed, but a lot of the time that's because they don't want to sound like an asshole. A lot of people are genuinely still quite sexist. I think a good example of that is childcare. When you come to an interview, the first thing you're asked is, what do you do outside your professional life? And you're expected to say something like sports, or being really good at chess, or whatever else you do. However, I think that saying, I've raised...
So, first thing I'd like to do is to congratulate all 4 of our speakers today. And this is always an emotive issue to get up and talk about, and especially in front of 200 or 300 of your peers. So I really do congratulate you all. I know a lot of work went into the preparation for this. I will note, however, that we did reach our decision just as the Q&A was starting. We did not take into account any of the discussion in the Q&A, or otherwise we would immediately disqualify Justin for not even bothering to read the book. Anyway, swiftly moving along. Some of the highlights from the debate, I thought the proposition started by laying out very clearly what were the issues at stake, and what was the reason we were all here debating this motion. And I think both Oscar and Merva did a great job of focusing in on where the issues were, and focusing in on what they believed were the solutions and how we could turn this around in quick time. The opposition, I think, did one of those classic debating, arguing maneuvers by immediately agreeing with everything that they said and agreeing with all of the facts and the points that were laid out. Justin went one step further by saying, I think, taking the proposals and laying them out as being quite narrowly defined as to what the solution was here, which we thought ultimately had a big impact on our decision. Justin talked in great detail about the top-down allocation of a quota that would ultimately lead to us going out and pulling in women from the street in order to fill our leadership positions. So hopefully that's not the way we want to run our company, so thank you for that, Justin. And Natasha went on, I think, to focus in again on the fact that there was a relatively narrow proposal from the proposition to solve the gender inequality that we see in leadership positions. Did a great job on rebuttal, and I thought Natasha also handled Ogden's question mid-flight with great poise, so well done. And I think in conclusion you can see where the decision is going. In this case, the panel found unanimously that we found for the opposition. And it's clearly going to take a magnificent place in the round of this We will call to conclusion our first debate. Thank you.